S01, episode 46 of the Potomac RPG Podcast. Who would have guessed it feels so good to be so bad?
Welcome one and all to the Potomac RPG Podcast, your source for old news, tired conversation, and mediocre advice for all of your favorite tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host and friendly NPC support character who certainly doesn't have a hidden secret evil agenda, Adam.
I'm Matt, not a monster, just ahead of the curve.
And you, the legendary bravest of the brave, shall live out the rest of your days in abject fear, watching helplessly as I bend the word to my will. Knowing you are utterly powerless to stop me, that you are no longer important enough for me to destroy. For I, Tom, will...
And it seems like we've lost Tom. Okay, the villain has been defeated. Let's move on with the show here, Matt. It looks like it's just you and me for the rest of this. So, Matt, how are you doing?
Doing all right. So yeah, we managed to survive, another evening in hell.
I see Tom has rejoined us. Okay, you're all right, Tom?
Yeah, sorry. Need a drink of water.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for being on the show, guys. So last night, we had our session of Avernus, and things got pretty interesting. And you know, we certainly don't want to give any spoilers for other people who want to play Avernus, but what it really brought into focus was kind of, you know, what's good and what's bad, and all the gray areas in between. Like, I don't know about how you guys felt about the session last night, but I started questioning quite a number of different things.
Well, I think we've always had a certain amount of moral ambiguity.
Sure.
In the game, and so here we've, without saying too much, we've, been handed at least the justification for one side. Whether or not that justification holds water remains to be seen.
Very true. Well, Tom, your character died a couple sessions ago, coming in as a new character in this particular place in the story. How did you make that kind of switch in your head to kind of discount everything that happened before and now focus on this very morally ambiguous situation where we're in right now?
I was actually able to easily judge what the party had done up to this point because I was no longer part of the party. I was an outsider looking in, and it was very much, it felt like in the session we were talking, it felt very much like everyone else went to the principal's office and I was not part of that group.
So it must have felt nice, didn't it?
It did feel a little bit nice. And also there's always, as a player, I've always felt that, I can have my character do something stupid, but as a player understand that's stupid, but still roll with it. So I can kind of take a step back anyway when from my own characters. So it was just a matter of taking a step back. The hardest part was trying to figure out what my character would know and what my character wouldn't know. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Every time. Well, and the interesting thing about last night is it got me thinking in terms of the bad guy and villains and choosing sides and things like that. And the basis for just about every campaign is that the players, most often the good guys, are on a collision course with the villain in some form or another. But the big bad evil guy doesn't just have to be some mindless monstrosity of awfulness. In fact, I'd venture to say it's much more impactful playing in that gray area. The types of villains you put in your game can really elicit some hard, morally questionable choices for your players to make. So that's what we're going to be getting into this week: villains, how to make them and how to play them. So Matt, let's start with you on this. What in your mind makes a really good villain in a tabletop game?
Well, I think what makes a good villain is some of the things that make a good villain in a book or a movie. I mean, the villain should at least initially be unstoppable. I mean, if the characters can just beat him down at square one, then he's not much of a villain, or at least have a villain that's uncatchable or not necessarily physically unstoppable. It's something that the villain's plans seem out of reach for the characters. The villain, I think, should have some measure of impressive skill or abilities that set them apart from the rank and file that the players will face. It's always best if the villain has some kind of personal connection to the heroes. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be true, but it adds a lot of weight. I happen to think that the best villains believe that they're right, and I think this gets into a little bit what we just talked about, shades of gray. That if a villain knows they're evil, they can have some fun. Oh, I'm evil, blah blah blah. But if the villain actually has justification for what they're doing, even if their reasoning is wrong, but they truly believe in what they're doing, they're going to see the good guys as the bad guys, and you have sort of that other element that drives the villain, and really at least for for a human or human like or any sentient being capable of reason, it adds an additional layer of pathos to them. And I think lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the villain from whether it's a tabletop or a movie or a book or whatever, I think the villain needs to be entertaining at some level. I mean, it could be witty catchphrases, it could be clever plots, it could be something. But when the villain is on screen or on set or whatever, that villain should be, everyone's attention is focused on them because they're at some level mesmerizing.
Now, that's some really good points there, and I want to tack on to two of them. Yeah, your second one particularly. I agree with you. Not only in terms of the villain believing that they are right, but also if the players can kind of see where they're coming from, even if they don't agree, like they can understand it. So it's not so much that, oh, well, this person believes this bad stuff, and but we still know everything's evil. If the players themselves can kind of question themselves, well, I can kind of see where that villain's coming from. That's really that really builds some strong emotions around it. And third, your third point there in terms of entertaining. Well, let me ask you, like, how witty catchphrases, and stuff like that are great, but how do you capture that attention? Like, what are some techniques that we can use in a game to really amp up the villain's spotlight?
Well, I mean, I think a tabletop is different, is different from a movie. I mean, obviously, we're going to use Darth Vader as, the classic, villain, right? Darth Vader's on screen, you have the sound of the breathing, the big, tall, black armor, right? In a tabletop, you're in the mind's eye, so you don't have that. But sometimes, a villain can have or do something that's absolutely dramatic, that just makes the players, wet their pants. Like, for example, so without giving, talking too much about the Avernus campaign, but on our transition through the portal to hell, we faced an opponent who had a sword that sucked the life out of people riding a nightmare. I mean, it was pretty iconic.
Yeah.
And there was no doubt with that description, of what just happened, just seeing an NPC like drop in one shot, everyone was, oh shit.
Yeah.
And I think, it could be something like that. It could be, it could be a moment where everything the players thought was true wasn't. But there's just something that makes the players immediately focus on that character. Maybe he's got 10 minions with him, but that guy standing there, or that girl standing there, or that whatever it is standing there, that entity is the head honcho.
Gotcha. Well, how about you, Tom? What in your mind makes a good villain in your games?
Well, again, agreeing with a lot with what Matt said, but it made me bring a question first to Matt. What would you say the difference is between a villain and an anti-hero?
Ooh, that's a pretty good one.
Asking the important questions. Ooh. All right.
I would say the only difference between the villain and the anti-hero is the point of view, right? I mean, if you're playing the villain, right, essentially because he's the protagonist, he becomes the anti-hero. if he's not the protagonist, he's still the villain. That's kind of a cynical answer, I suppose. But.
Yeah, because like a lot of what you're saying, like it like you said, especially the comment about a catchphrase or witticisms. Think of any number of anti-heroes. Example, Deadpool would be one that they never like there's a very fine line between there, and I would agree with you that it's kind of all down to the perspective. It goes back to like who wins in the comic book fight, Superman or the Hulk? Well, it's whatever the writer says wins, kind of thing. So yeah, that makes some sense.
Well, and while we're on the topic of semantics here, yeah, I know this isn't the case, but in my mind, I've always differentiated between, well, to a certain extent, I think there is almost a Venn diagram of sorts between villain and BBEG. Like whenever I hear BBEG, I think of some horrible monster, oozing stuff, and it's like this primordial evil entity. Whereas villain, I look at more on like the intellectual side, making choices, and they're a bad person, but like it's more about some of the actions that are questionable that they take, and things like that. It's not so much that we're facing some aberration when it comes to a villain. And I'm just curious what you guys think in terms of that. Like, do you differentiate between them, or are they the same?
So would you say like a villain is the local bandit leader when the characters are, early level, and then the BBEG would be the, reality destroying aberration or demigod or god that's going to, reshape everything into its image, would be your BBEG then?
Yeah, well, yeah, to a certain extent, like the two can overlap, but I still differentiate. But
I think they overlap, but I think the distinguishing characteristic is, I guess, redeemable qualities, right? So if you're facing an entity with very few redeemable qualities, it can still be the big bad evil guy, the villain, but you would never mistake it for the anti-hero, right? But the more redeemable qualities the adversary has, the more it heads towards the anti-hero, portion of the Venn diagram, and then it could get to a point where you could flip the story, and have a character play the quote unquote adversary, and now maybe the heroes are the villains when viewed from that character's point of view.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, hey, let's get a little bit deeper on this subject. Let's get into some questions for the week. The first post that we have comes from Reddit user L Mason, who asks, how to give a villain backstory without monologuing. Basically, in the campaign I am planning, the BBEG has taken 4 people to use as his 4 horsemen, and each person has a tie to the horsemen they are. For example, the horseman of pestilence was a priestess during the time of Great Plague, and she was expected to help and save everyone, but as more and more people got infected, she got desperate. She reached out one last prayer to her god, but the god to answer was the BBEG, tricking her and turning her into a horseman. Interesting. All right. How do I give this information to the players without a sprawling monologue or a way that feels forced? So, Tom, I know you opened with your own monologue, but what are your thoughts on being more subtle and impactful with introducing a BBEG?
So I would look at this as, and again, the timeline, reading through it again, the timeline would be that they've already been taken by the BBEG. Initially, I was thinking that they would, meet these individuals, like they would meet the priestess and hear her story, and kind of maybe do a side quest for that individual. They're any other NPC, but then they just disappear, and that they basically get it's kind of a instead of they're getting the plot of the BBEG, they're suddenly noticing that elements that they would come across as normal, like side quest or parts of the general adventure, go missing. These individuals, kind of like because there's 4 individual people, you can almost do kind of a Legend of Zelda theme where you have 4 locations, 4 themes within those, and then you're trying to overcome each obstacle, each place. So there would be, there would be a town that is very sparsely populated. There's a history of the town having had pestilence, and there's a story of this, priestess who saved everyone, or maybe if the case is tricked by the BBG, that's a local legend of this evil, banshee who, stole the souls of everyone. And that could be kind of this, you're hearing about not necessarily the BBG, but each of the horsemen as a tale per how they were taken by the BBG. And then you could actually, when they start finding this common thread, you could actually start to hear that, or start to learn, or have the players figure out through either researching or engaging with other NPCs, that the story might not necessarily be as black and white as, these are these evil entities that just sprang up. There's some sort of common thread that's causing this. And then by the time they get to the BBG, they know that each of these 4 horsemen are actually victims.
Okay. Interesting take. All right, Matt, how about you? Weigh in on this. So we got rumor mill stuff.
There's a few mechanisms you can use. I mean, one of which Steve used in our Avernus campaign, which is having a flashback played by the players. Right. I think that was a really cool that was a really cool device.
Yeah.
And I think you could have the DM here could do something similar where the characters find a location of import or some something that's important to the past of this horseman, and suddenly there's a flashback, and now they're playing characters in a story that maybe it could have some small effects on what happened in the lore that they don't know about, but they get to sort of it's like playing the opening scene of like a Final Fantasy game, right, where this is bound to happen, and you're playing Vixen Wedge or whatever. It's a neat way to do it. Another way to do it is to have the characters simply witness a play or hear a ballad about this character, so they gain lore kind of from the local flavor, right? And maybe this play or ballad is horrifying, and maybe it's partially true but not all true. Maybe it's only part of the story. But if this horseman is someone who's major in the history of the region, then there may be, stories about them, and seeing those stories set down in another medium, the players may get a sense of what had happened. And a third device, which isn't used all that much, but was something that was in the old Ravenloft game, and I'm kind of in the older editions, and I'm hoping they sort of reintroduce it in 5th edition, is sometimes what they refer to as a haunt or a phantom shift. So the characters are in, let's say, a house where a murder took place or something, and the house is haunted, right? And all of a sudden, they're witnessing the events. Like, they're there. They can't change anything, but they're actually there in this place where great trauma occurred. And I suppose for this horseman, I mean, maybe they went and they killed a whole lot of people right after becoming a horseman. Something horrible happened, and if they stumble on the location where terrible evil took place, right, they could be participants in this supernatural recording, if you will, and see events, or at least the events through the eyes of a victim, or possibly through the eyes of the horsemen themselves.
Damn, nicely done, guys. That's some good ideas there in terms of not only the rumor mill, but in terms of backflashes or flashbacks. A really good tool to use, and then this idea of haunts to be used. Matt, really good ideas, and hopefully that gives L. Mason some ideas to work with for their campaign. Would love to hear how that campaign kind of takes off with this Villainous. It's kind of a neat campaign that they got planned. I like the tie-in with the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So good luck out there, L. Mason.
News here.
And the sound of Ralphie the News Goblin can mean only one thing. It's time for Potomac RPG News. So a few quick hits here. First up, Emily Garbett over at Games Radar has an article talking about the recent announcement that Hugh Grant has been cast as the main villain in the upcoming Dungeons and Dragons movie. Now, I know we're all looking at this movie with a bit of trepidation. We really don't want it to suck. So, Matt, do you think the addition of Hugh Grant as the villain pushes the movie toward more suck or less suck?
Oh boy. First, I have to admit I've never been a Hugh Grant fan. I have nothing against him personally. I've just never been into the movies he's been in. But to be honest, I have no idea. So if anyone remembers the really horrible Dungeons and Dragons movie from, I don't know what that was,
yes,
like 2000 or whatever, and Jeremy Irons, who plays him, Jeremy Irons is a great actor. I mean, he's because of actor, but honestly, he overacted in it. It's the movie sucked for lots of reasons, except for Marlon Wayans, who's actually pretty good. Strangely enough. Then again, he was really good in Requiem for a Dream, so shows what I know. But just because the actor, I think it's kind of hard to say that it would make it suck or not suck just from the actor, because I sometimes an actor just hits, they just hit the right notes in a movie, that the scripts, they're just into it and they live in the character, and sometimes they don't. And so I don't think we can make a predictor on it, but like you said, I have a lot of trepidation. I still have emotional trauma from the previous Dungeons and Dragons movie. I think there's a problem of what I call fantasy pandering, where it's like, oh, look at our wonderful magic this and look at our wonderful magic that, instead of actually like telling a story, about the characters and having all the fantasy there as just sort of, it's what's in the background that makes the world work, but not the focus. But I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe it'll be great. Maybe it'll be awful. I don't think I can predict.
Well, the comments I'm seeing online seem to break about 25% are happy about it, 75% are not happy about it. I will say I certainly prefer Hugh Grant in the role of an antagonist rather than a protagonist. So I think I'd much rather see him on the bad side. I think he could pull it off. It's just I honestly agree with you. I think it's more about the story. Like, are they going to have a good story here, or is this just going to be a pile of horse manure when it comes out? Tom, what do you think about Hugh Grant being cast as villain?
I mean, when I was looking at this, I was like, what movies has he been in that he's been a villain? And I was searching through, and after going through about 20 rom-coms, because that's that's the majority of his.
Used to be his.
Well, he's older now.
Yeah, he's older now, but, and more villainy.
Not really. I mean, the top two hits I came across were, one was The Gentleman, where he played a kind of a sleazy private eye who that would like try to blackmail people, and it wasn't really a villain as much as he was just kind of a passive antagonist. Yeah. The only ones that he was actually a true villain was he had maybe a 3-minute scene in Cloud Atlas where he was a cannibal. With all the makeup and everything, you would never know it was him. He had no dialogue that I know of, and I actually watched an interview about it, and where he talked about it, and he actually said, he's like, when the director said, yeah, you're going to be a cannibal and you're going to be, scaring these people, and he's like, well, do you want me to do like a joke or something? Because I could do that, but this is not normally my thing. So even as the actor himself, he's kind of doesn't have, at least from this interview, has mentioned that he's not really one for being the bad guy. Oh, wow. So it's going to be very interesting.
This should work out perfectly then.
He'll have lots of jokes, maybe.
Yeah, lots of just what we want from our villains in Dungeons and Dragons movies is them cracking jokes here and there. All right, well, let's move on to the next article before I get too depressed here. So the next one here is from Geekspin by Christian Sacklau about Adventurers League dropping the PH+1 rule. Basically, when it came to source books for character creation, you could only use what was in the player's handbook plus one other source book. It was meant to keep balance a bit tighter. Now, Tom, you've actually played Adventurers League. What do you think of this change?
I'm excited because in one hand, I'm excited as a player because I think it provides a lot of the unique aspects of the newer books in D&D, not just the basic player's handbook, and more experienced players can do more advanced things. That being said, I am hesitant from the DM perspective because the reason that Adventurers League does this is because you're having, people are dropping in and out. You're trying to streamline the story, the plot, what the characters can do. You have a player who might not be in there for a couple days or a couple sessions and then come right back in. It's a lot of these for the DMs for this, just a passive, just to do a story on a Saturday afternoon. So I'm especially with Tasha's, like feel like with a lot of the stuff that's changed in Tasha's and a lot of the new features that I feel do muck up a bit the standard adventures that were from older, like the earlier adventures. So think of your standard, your Dragon of Icespire Peak, your Lost Mines of Phandelver that I played in Adventure League, where some of the things that are in Tasha's, like I'm just even thinking of of some of the abilities, like the fighter ability, the blind fighting, where you have blind sight, something that's only up until that book was only accessible to monsters. A character can get at level 2, I think, right out the gate. Blind sight at 10 feet. They're immune to a status condition. And that I could see really playing a lot of those absolute rules that are in Tasha's, that I could see really playing havoc on the DM.
Yeah.
But I mean the +1, and then that, even with the +1 rule, that would apply. But now you're doing that with that's one example. With the original rule, the Player's Handbook +1 with Tasha's. Now you're doing it with Xanathar's. You're doing it with any of the adventures modules that might have that. So it can, and I don't know. I don't know if the original one would let some of the third party things like Eberron. I don't know if that would be included as well.
I believe
some of those settings.
I think it does, and I can kind of understand the idea of going away from that rule, just because I think people who are experienced might lose excitement by having that much of constriction on their character creation. But I gotta agree with you, like the idea of having all those source books available make it really hard to balance things out. Now, Matt, you've never played Adventurers League, right?
No, I'm not familiar with Adventurers League. I mean, I did look a bit into Pathfinder had their Pathfinder Society, which is analogous. So my opinion is that 5e is a fairly constrained system, even with a lot of the source books. So I think it's okay to open it up to more source books, with the caveat that I think there's some source books. I think if anything, you do the opposite. I think you say, all right, there's some source books here that, well, we don't think that the content here, is appropriate. Like maybe Eberron's not appropriate, or Warforged or anywhere, right? And so you exclude. So you have a list of excluded things, and I think that was what Pathfinder Society did, and they had a hell of a lot more books than 5e does. There was splat books everywhere, crazy character play, right? So in the end, they basically what Paizo did is they said that, okay, well, these things are balanced for Pathfinder, so they're not allowed, but everything else potentially is. Now, I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but I think it's sort of better to go in that direction, to say, okay, where, especially in a system like 5e that's really already kind of bonus limited, to say that, okay, these things are out, but the other stuff's not going to unbalance the game too much.
That makes sense. I could go with
no
that.
Warforged.
No Warforged. All right. Well, lastly, we have a YouTube video, and I saw this post pop up on Reddit, and watched the video here. Thought it'd be interesting. It's from Ben DeHart that posted this week, talking about creating villains for your campaign. Specifically, he lays out some classic archetypes to use paired with Xanathar's rival system. So, Matt, after taking a watch on this video, do you think there's anything useful in here for some aspiring DMs?
Absolutely. So I think the Xanathar system, the goals, assets, plans way of breaking it down is actually a good way to kind of design what the villain's all about. As for the archetypes, I mean, you can kind of make archetypes however you want, but really I feel the archetypes really break down into two realms that you can mix and balance in various ways, and those ways are combat or physical threat and the other realm is intrigue, social or political threat, and a good adversary can balance those both. And he gives examples of opponents that work through popular opinion or work through the social mores of the people around them to stick it to the heroes rather than coming at them with a sword. And I think balancing those two realms along with the different flavor of what the villain's quote unquote class is can give you a lot of options.
Definitely. Well, how about you, Tom? Looking through this archetype list, anything kind of pique your interest?
Several did. Touching what Matt said is, the as a DM, one of the struggles I've come across with making a good BBEG is making a proper threat that seems meaningful to the players, because either it falls in only a couple categories, or a few categories. Either they're on the physical side, either they're so tough that the party fears them but doesn't actually try to see that as a challenge, or they seem like too much of a pushover and the party tries to take them out on day one. And then with the intrigue and stuff, if you have a good party or a good set of players that will pursue that, I think there's a lot of depth there. One of the ones that I feel kind of played with that the best was the Archbishop example that they gave, where it was, it's a religious leader who basically controls a town with with a very strict dogma. No weapons are available for the party to buy. There's no alcohol allowed. Like everything, like this town is not somewhere they want to be. But from your standard adventuring party, but there's clearly something wrong here. The people are kind of in dire straits, but don't really know it. Because they're being, repressed so much. But then the thing that really tipped me off, and I'm like, okay, this was the example I gave was a team of trained warrior nuns.
Oh, that was the abbess or whatever. Yeah,
they would try to. That would basically, the party comes in, they're like, okay, we're gonna leave, and then these nuns attack in the middle of the night. Like that could, like, you reflavor it with however you want to, but basically these holy avengers who are basically going to come down and try to kill the party from the shadows, because they are an example of being uncouth, or being even just a threat to the order that this tyrannical leader is putting up, or even that they might expose. Maybe the leader is not as pious as they put on, and it's just about control, and they're afraid that the party might expose them, so they're seeing him as a threat, and then it basically could lead from there. I thought that was a lot of fun, and an idea. If the party starts to care about the town, then the abbot would try to excommunicate the party, or try to turn the people against them. And it's a very interesting. There's that balance of intrigue, but if they don't really take it seriously, then suddenly warrior nuns.
Yeah, I mean, there's an escalation, right? Like if you don't play the intrigue game well, right, then you have an escalation on the physical side.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, looking down through this list, a lot of good options here, but the one that kind of jumped out at me was the Architect. And the reason being is there's a fantasy series called the Rhaenyra Chronicles by Michael J. Sullivan, who has this dwarf character named Magnus, who is such a good craftsman that he's able to build these deathly traps. And as soon as I saw the Architect archetype, I was like, oh, that's Magnus. That's Magnus from Rhaenyra Chronicles. And I love the idea of that, of someone who actually puts their mark on things, because they're so good at doing this that they want it to be known that it was them who did it. So really interesting kind of layout of different archetypes to be used. I think
there is a logical problem with that, right? If you're really good at making traps that kill people and you put your name on it, well, the person's not going to live to tell people you did it. So what's the point of having your mark on it in the first place?
Well, I think when people find the dead bodies, they're like, who could have done this? Oh, it was this guy. Or the example within the video here about, this character being hired by a king to trap his like treasure room, to make sure that no one can get his hoard or stash. And so that's one. Although it's hard to make him a villain if he's just a hardworking individual, doing a good job. I don't.
Well, I mean, if the king's the law and he was hired, right, everything he did was lawful.
Yeah.
And players are intruders, right?
I don't see where the problem is.
Can't just go kill the guy. I mean, that would be murder.
All right. Well, that was the news for this week. Some interesting stuff happening out there. That's for sure. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your feedback there. But we're going to step out for a moment, but stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break. When we were first getting this podcast together, we knew we needed some good music. And we looked into a lot of options that are out there, but we settled on Soundstripe. At soundstripe.com, they have such a wide variety of high-quality music to choose from. Every song that you hear on this podcast is from Soundstripe, and we couldn't be happier with what they have to offer. And it's not just music. They have a ton of sound effects and video stock footage as well. So if you're making a podcast or videos on YouTube or have some creative project you're working on, check out Soundstripe. They're worth a look. And right now you can use the promo code Potomac RPG, all one word, and get 10% off. That's Potomac RPG, all one word, to get 10% off your purchase. Elevate your work with the finest stock media all in one place at soundstripe.com. And with that, let's get back to the show. How about another post? This question comes from Reddit user Chance1441, who asks, how to run a lawful neutral villain. I'm currently working on a homebrew campaign where my PCs are pirates, and the BBEG is a lawful neutral group bringing law into a largely lawless land, similar to Red Dead Redemption 2. A big consistent theme I want to have when the PCs help with any situation this group caused is that they did something for the right reason, but it caused a lot of misery in the process. An example is that they are going to come across a fae that lives in an old dungeon. He used to live in a clearing in the woods with another fae and a child. Their ambient magic enthralled by accident. They just thought of him as they would any other curious woodland creature and let him hang around for a week or so, feeding him and keeping him well. A group from this like neutral group came in because, they kind of kidnapped the kid accidentally and brought him to safety, killing one of the fae in the process. Just so it's known, I play most creatures from the Feywild as detached from material plane customs and morality, viewing things like turning a human child into a squirrel as perfectly neutral because they're just turning one creature into another, not harming it or doing something against its wishes. What are some good examples of actions that, while inherently good for society, leave misery in their wake? I want to emphasize heavy-handed solutions, but I want to hear any ideas. I have a whole campaign to fill. So, idea time here, Tom. What are some not so evil but morally relative things that Chance1441 can do for this neutral group?
I feel like, and to clarify, the neutral group is basically the people who would kill the Fae, or the people who would the Fae themselves. I'm assuming.
I believe this would be the people killing the Fae.
Okay. I feel like you could go with the simple one you could go with is they're monster hunters. They're renowned heroes who have slain vampires, werewolves. They've dealt with they've dealt with every kind of monster in the book that you can think of. They've slain dragons. They're powerful in their own right, which would also make it a fitting BBEG or a fitting antagonist for the end game because of their skills. But they could also they're basically just heroes from another adventure. They're the party that that went out, they saved the damsel in distress, they killed the dragon, they did all this, but they're just keep doing this because that's all they know, and they're doing it for the human centric mindset, or the civilization centric mindset. They're saving the humanoids that they're familiar with, but they are shoot first, ask questions later. And you could really play into that of the party is basically following the after effects, the destruction left in the wake of these individuals. They come across a burned village of goblins who were actually peaceful if you looked at them, but because they were too close to the city and someone didn't like them, the city was afraid they were going to be attacked. Then this party of heroes went out and slayed them. And there could be a lot of both, like, two sides of the same coin. On one side, they seem to be the heroes, but on the other side, they're the villains.
Makes sense. Well, how about you, Matt? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually fairly easy to come up with lawful neutral villains, or at least lawful neutral adversaries, because, I mean, our society that we live in is effectively lawful neutral. I mean, look at all the laws and bureaucracy we have, and there's a lot of things where the government means well, or whatever, it goes totally off the rails. I mean, just looking at sort of what's this is more Canada than the U.S., but you could have a scenario where you have the heroes taking orc children from their savage parents for a proper human education.
Oh, jeez.
You could have what about magic items, right? I mean, if people are like, what happens when some crazy person gets their hand on a wand of fireballs and blows up a school? That's right. True. I mean, maybe there needs to be background checks for magic items, right? That's a very lawful neutral thing to do.
Are you talking about bureaucracy in my tabletop games?
Well, but that's what lawful neutral tends towards, right? And it's for the good of society, right? They're not villain. They're like, oh, we've got to, these people don't have a constitutional right to magical weapons of mass destruction, but you just need to look at any kind of societal conflict. I mean, I think a good example in fiction is the Battlestar Galactica reimagining, right? Okay. There were a lot of scenarios in that series where things came up, with prisoners, with labor, with all these things that they had to keep things going, and sort of, individual, rights were kind of trampled on because it was something that their society needed. So it's very easy to make a lawful neutral villain, even if they're not villainous, because there's plenty of things that can go wrong. I mean, even treatment of prisoners or whatever. I mean, I know Adam, you may have a lot to say about that, in our society. But there's a lot of things that societies do, that people in power do, which is for the good of society, and maybe it tramples on individual rights. Maybe there's a group, they could be monsters or not quite human, that's being put upon by the kind of human first mentality. So I think for lawful neutral, it's very easy to do it, and it makes it. And the advantage of having a lawful neutral enemy that controls society is that you have to sort of play the intrigue game as well. You can't, in most cases, just go to the Capitol and kill them, right?
Yeah. Well, so basically, what you're telling Chance here is look at real life and copy paste, because the examples are all around us of lawful neutral stuff.
Lawful neutral. I mean, that's what most human, with a few exceptions, most human societies tend towards what D&D. I don't like alignments per se, but given the D&D alignment framework, like I would say, most human societies tend towards lawful neutral.
Oh.
And here's a question for you, Matt, because I came across this. I don't know all of the points that were made in it, but there was an argument that I watched before where they talked about how the Jedi were the Jedi Order was actually not the most morally sound, because of how they recruited. Stupid. How they recruited younglings and everything, and how they had to be so young, and they normally went to backwater planets to very poor individuals and said, "Hey,
from my point of view, the Jedi are evil."
Yes. Basically, it was a point of view that not necessarily the Jedi were evil, but that their methods were not the most honorable.
Conducive to individual freedom.
Yes.
Absolutely. Even if it's for the good of the galaxy. So it's very easy to have, when someone's in charge, right? It's very easy for the people in charge to do things that hurt people, even if they are or they think they are for the good of society. And I don't think that you have to look that far in the real world to find examples that you could port to a fantasy game. Now, some of those might be sensitive topics for some people. I'll admit to that. I mean, the thing about the taking the orc children away, right? That's actually happened not with orcs, but with native peoples, in various ways. So that's a real thing. But the point is that societies do these things, and they think they're doing the right thing. Whether they are or not is another question.
Yeah. Well, great ideas there. Hopefully that gives Chance something to work with. Would love to hear how that campaign is going. Now, we've been talking about villains and how to manage them in your game, but coming up with a really good villain isn't always an easy process. So let's see if we can come up with some custom villains on the fly in our long-running segment. Let's build something. Welcome to Let's Build Something, where we get to put our creativity to the test and build something live for all the world to hear. In this week's segment, we're going to build ourselves some memorable villains to use in-game. So in order to make these interesting, we're going to use the website whothefuckismydndcharacter.com because we've used it so much in so many other segments. I just love the website. So what we'll do is we'll get on there and find kind of a basis for our villains. So you guys ready?
Yep.
Sure. All right. So we're going to load up that website, and then on the count of 3, we're going to refresh. 1, 2, 3.
Refreshing.
Okay. So, Matt, what is your basis for your villain?
It says I am a well-intentioned gnome ranger from a fallen kingdom who saw their whole family consumed by a gelatinous cube.
Oh, well, you got a lot to work with, man. That's a good one. All right. Tom, how about you?
So I might need to change mine because mine's a pretty chill elf wizard from a town of outlaws who saw their whole family consumed by a gelatinous cube.
What? 2 gelatinous cubes?
Gelatinous cubes there.
This is impossible. Yes, I will rule on that. Tom, you may hit refresh one more time.
Okay.
Now what do you got? Gelatinous cube again?
No, I wish. I'm a proud half-orc monk from the treeless forest who had their nose cut off in a duel.
Okay, interesting. And I am a hypercritical halfling paladin from a pompous wizard school who woke up in a bar with no memory and a sealed letter. Okay. All right. So let's circle back to you, Matt. Looking at your character background, any kind of good villain vibes that you're coming up with?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a good basis for a gnomish ranger who is, to put it bluntly, genocidal. I guess. I mean, he's an eco threat, Captain Planet villain here. So I think what would be good is that he's out to just totally extirpate, all slimes, mold, mosses, fungi, puddings, and similar creatures, right? But it may be that, some of these creatures are actually important to, waste disposal and under dark societies or whatever, right? That there's they're not evil creatures, they're just, giant things that consume
and don't forget about that peaceful myconoid
and the myconoids, right?
Yeah.
Right. So this gnome is just down the warpath, and he's gonna go wiping out all these creatures, and he's gonna destroy peaceful, especially underdark societies that may be dependent on some of these creatures, until they're totally extinct from his campaign world.
Nice. All right, Tom, how about yours? Any ideas for villainy?
I would say that I'm thinking of very much a kind of like the lone gunman, like you kind of think your Western. They have that bit of mutilation from either a scar, in this case, his nose was cut off in a duel, and he's trying to basically that line of anti-hero versus villain, and he basically is going through and is challenging everyone, trying to basically win. Like he's reliving that lost duel that he was injured, and he's basically going from town to town, fighting everyone, trying to overcome that trauma. But he is so powerful that he's actually killing people, and he's a threat to everyone around him.
Well, whenever I first heard it, because he's laid back, right? From
No,
a town
proud. That was my
Oh.
previous one. He's
the-
proud.
He's
elf
proud.
half-orc monk.
Gotcha. All right, cool. And then with mine, this hypercritical halfling from a pompous wizard school. So they wake up in a bar with no memory and a sealed letter. What I think, since this person's a paladin, that basically failed out of this wizard school, or just was looked down upon, and one of the wizards there actually cast a spell that wiped his memory, and the sealed letter is almost like a haha fuck you kind of letter from one of the wizards. So basically, as this paladin, now he's on a religious quest to wipe out magic users of the wizarding variety, certainly not the religious side, but like the wizards, sorcerers, and warlocks, they must all be killed. So these schools of wizardry are all being hit by this halfling just on this warpath of destruction against.
What about clerics of the god of magic?
Well, there's no room for half measures. If it's the god of magic, then he's got to either choose whether that's the god side or the magic side and make a choice. There won't be a gray area when it comes to his decision making. He's probably gonna err on the side of caution, though, or on the side of vengeance, and wipe out any clerics from the god of magic. So we'll see.
What's with all these genocidal halflings?
They're just a violent people. They just
Melkar Bitterleaf.
Yep. They just that's just in their nature. Now I have no idea. I want to know what's up with the gelatinous cubes that they're part of so many backstories on this website. That's crazy. So
they just want a hug, okay?
Yeah, that's all. And the hug. Right. I've been inside a gelatinous cube. There's nothing huggy about it. All right. Well, hey, that was great. That was good villains there, especially on the fly. Well done, guys. That was Let's Build Something. But let's get into our last post of the week. This comes from Reddit user Zodakar, who asks, Pied Piper is our tier 1 BBEG, and I have writer's block. I'm DMing for a neighbor and his 2 sons, 11 and 10. Our first session was outstanding. The story was able to keep both boys' attention for the 5 hours we played. The first session culminated at a circus, where the BBEG, a modified bard, performed an illusion and summoned all the children into a portal. A battle ensued, but the bard escaped through the portal. Party gave chase, but succumbed to an overpowered sleep spell. And that is where our session ended. The characters are halfway through level 2. So now I have to fill in some adventures leading to another battle with the elusive bard. My biggest stumbling block is, why is the Piper kidnapping? Perhaps I should stick to the original story, but I'm looking for ideas. The final battle will happen at level 4 with the bard and his guardian spectator, or at least that's how I plan it. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. So, Matt, what are some show-stopping BBEG performance plots that Zodakar could use to keep their players, engaged and figure out why this Piper is stealing children?
Yeah, so first of all, let me say I love the idea of an evil bard.
Yes, like this is for a 10 and 11-year-old. Are you kidding me? Where was this DM when I was a kid?
So when I read the description and he read that the kids were playing and that he's obviously inspired by the Pied Piper of Hamelin, I thought to myself, fairies everywhere.
Yep.
So I like so my personal feeling, a good motivation for the villain is that this bard has dealings with fairies, and he's made a bargain with some fairy lord or some fairy being, right? And for whatever reason, the fairy being wants children because fairies love children, because children exist at a certain borderline. And so the motivation is the bard has gotten something in exchange for bringing these children to him, and being this gateway. We don't know where it went, but let's say it's fairies. Let's say it goes to Fairyland, or or the Feywild, or whatever we're calling it. Right? Yeah. There's a lot of things you can do. You can have the characters taking part in mythical stories, and you can have the players transformed into children, or turned into animals, or facing fairy duplicates or any other number of fairy tale type of scenarios. So I kind of think it's very rich to mine in the fairy area.
Yeah, because shit can get wild in the Feywild. Like that. There's a lot of options to play with there. All right, Tom, how about you? Why is this Pied Piper stealing kids?
So Matt, when you said that you're working for the fairies, all I could think of is it's the Fae from Chance 1441's question for the neutral.
That's true.
The neutral.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all coming together. It's all coming together.
It's synergy. This is synergy right there.
Trans DM campaign.
There you go.
Yep.
No, that was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it all it's one big circus. And like you said, turning into animals, like it could be working. It's a you could to go off of what you said, Matt. It could be a the theater in the Feywild, and this is actually it's not a human bard, but it might be some sort of like Fey creature, not an archfey because that's pretty powerful, but something along those lines, some sort of trick magical being that wants to put on a good show, and these children are actually going to be turned into animals to be part of the performance. And these are all the performers, and not only maybe just not maybe just animals, but they could be magically gifted with talents of juggling or music, and these are all the performers that they're collecting, because this has to be something that the Fae in the Feywild have never seen before. So it has to be something from the material plane.
Well,
fairy clowns.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I think Zodakar has some really decent ideas just from what you guys put out there. Those are excellent ideas to include, and boy, do I wish you all the luck, Zodakar, in this campaign. It's so great that you're not only DMing for your neighbor, but his two sons. Always good to get those young kids interested in D&D and playing the game, because that's the future of our hobby. So awesome to hear, and good luck out there. Best of luck in your campaign. So that's going to do it for us this week, though. Remember, if you want to send in your questions or anything you find on the internet, you can send them to questions@potomacripg.com. Check out our store for merch at teespring.com/stores/potomacrpg. And lastly, you can follow us at Potomac RPG on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So thanks for being on today, Matt and Tom. Thank you to the rest of the Potomac RPG crew, and of course, all of our wonderful listeners out there. So for the Potomac RPG Podcast, I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Tom.
Till next time, keep those dice rolling, keep those stories coming, and
Never stop playing. Can we just pause for a second? There's something beeping. It's driving me up insane.